Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to be looking at an introduction to R Markdown, which is a tool to turn our analyses that we do in R typically into high quality documents, reports, presentations, or even dashboards. So R Markdown, which is an additional tool separate from the R programming language itself, provides an authoring framework for data science and analytics very generally. So it's a tool that's very useful for communicating analyses that we do more effectively. So it facilitates communication of our analyses, but also what we'd call reproducibility and also more transparency in our analyses. So showing more clearly the steps to get to the end result of our analyses. So R Markdown is what we call a document markup language. Essentially allows us to combine R code, Markdown language, other various sources of programming into one single document. Knitr is another tool, the Knitr package underneath, that sort of brings all this together and can produce various types of, again, reports, documents, dashboards, all kinds of things. The most common or sort of default output types are HTML documents. So it could be a website, slideshow like this that are HTML based, or other types of files, PDF documents, which commonly would be for writing like an article or a report in a PDF format, and then the commonly used Microsoft Word document. We can use R Markdown to produce Word documents that have R code and R analyses integrated or weaved into that. So again, the most common uses of R Markdown are to communicate results to decision makers who just want to see our conclusions, our results, not the code that it took to get there. It's also a tool that allows us to collaborate with others more easily, because even if other people know how to code, showing our R code, our programming woven into our analysis can sometimes make that more transparent or more easily understood how we went about the overall analysis of our data set. So Hadley Wickham, chief data scientist at RStudio, likes to call R Markdown a modern day lab notebook, essentially a place in which we're writing notes, maybe more detailed explanations of how we came to our conclusions. Okay. R Markdown files are slightly different than R program files. So R programming files, which we'll become familiar with a bit as well, have the file extension .r, whereas R Markdown files have the file extension .rmd for R Markdown. R Markdown files have a particular structure to them. At the top of every R Markdown file is what we call a YAML header, which stands for yet another Markdown language. Then interwoven in the R Markdown document typically are what we call chunks or blocks of R code, which are enclosed or encased in these 3 backticks that sort of opens an R chunk, and then you have another 3 backticks that closes an R chunk or block of code. And interwoven with that code, outside of these code blocks, are text that's mixed with what we would call simple text formatting. And we'll look at some examples of what that means in an activity as well. So YAML, as I mentioned, is yet another markup language. It kind of sounds like, at least to me, YAML sounds like a mix between a yak and a camel. Not at all, just an acronym, right? So evidently at the time that this language itself was created, there was many different simple text languages that were being created. So the creators of this cheekily named this YAML, and that it was just another markup language. Okay. So R Markdown, given that it's so versatile and can produce so many different types of documents, there's many different ways to customize it. It's a little bit hard or difficult to communicate or grasp all the possibilities of this. Easiest way to show this is probably just to look at some examples of what people have created with R Markdown. Okay. So here, RStudio on their website has some examples of some very neat things that have been produced with R Markdown. Okay. So one of these, for example, is a dashboard that showcases real-time statistics about different R packages that are being downloaded from CRAN. Okay. So it's showing like the most recent packages as they're being downloaded. Okay. And then these various statistics about those. Okay. So this is one dashboard that can be produced with R Markdown. That's one example of one thing. Here's another dashboard someone made with R Markdown. So you can have these interactive graphics that are interwoven with other types of plots in this grid. Okay, and these ones are very nice graphics. They're interactive. But dashboards are just one example of something R Markdown can produce. It can also produce, as I mentioned, Microsoft Word documents. Okay. So this one's not the most complex Word document, but it's an example of something R Markdown can produce. So you can have a title, author, different sections, and simple text, as we would say. And then here's R code, or here's R code, and then results produced from that R code sort of interwoven with the text. You can also have hyperlinks, bolding of words, plots created from R code. Again, all interwoven into this Word document that was created by R Markdown. So those are a couple examples. You can also create presentations. So slideshows, Beamer slideshows is one type of LaTeX slideshow you can create with R Markdown. You can also create HTML slideshows, like this one that we're looking at was created with R Markdown, and it's based on HTML. You can also create entire books using R Markdown. So R for Data Science, that textbook was made entirely with R Markdown. It's an HTML book and was able to have all these chapters, all these sections, the hyperlinks. This way you can navigate it. This was all built with R Markdown. Okay. And websites. So my personal website that I created when I was on the job market was created using R Markdown. This is one of the HTML templates you can use to create this website. Okay. So many different ways that you can use R Markdown. Another way, the last way I'll mention, is journal articles. Sometimes people use R Markdown to write journal articles because it's easier to interweave your code and analyses in the writing of research articles. So many, many different ways in which we can use R Markdown. Those are just a few. We'll look at an activity to interactively jump right into R Markdown and get started with that. Okay. And also as a reminder, or to mention, homework 1 is now posted. So take a look at that on Blackboard. And also here's the weekly readings for next week. Thanks. In a separate video, we'll look at activity 2 here.